A case in camera chapter 5. For a moment we all gazed stupidly at that jar and candle, but the next moment our eyes were fastened on Philip's face. Now ordinarily Estale's face, clean, shaven since 1914, is quite a pleasant one to look at, lightly browned, and with the savor of the sea still lingering about it. Nor was it noticeably pale now. Indeed, you might have said that some inner excitation made it not pale at all. But there was no disguising the strained tenseness of it. At the same time he was obviously attempting such a disguise. His features were set in a would-be easy smile, but the smile stopped at his eyes. These blinked, though possibly at the sudden brightness after the obscurity below. And he spoke without pause or preliminary, as if rehearsing something he had had time to get letter perfect but not to make entirely and naturally his own. Did you think I was never coming up? The mechanical smile was turned on us all in turn. I suppose I have been rather a long time. Just wool gathering. I apologize to everybody. Where are the liqueur glasses? There was a dead silence. Was it possible that he had heard nothing, knew nothing of what had occurred? Monty Rook was the first to speak. Do you mean to say you didn't hear it? He blurted out. Then, as Philip seemed to concentrate that artificial smile suddenly on him alone, he seemed sorry he had drawn attention to himself. And where on earth have you been? Philip demanded slowly. What's the matter with your clothes? Been emptying the dustbins? Here, let me give you a clean up, man. He got rid of the jar of liqueur, not by putting it down on a table, but by the simple if unusual expedient of letting it drop through his fingers, where it made a heavy thump, rolled over on its side, and came to rest. He stepped forward. But Rook, for some reason or other, stepped much more quickly back. He muttered something about his clothes not mattering. It was only a few grains of dust, but damp, better let it dry before touching it. It was at this point that I caught Cecil Hubbard's eye. Hubbard's is a bright blue eye, with angular lids like little set squares and a tiny dark dot in the middle of the blue. That I may not know very much about pictures, but it knows a good deal about men and their faces. Estale was taking risks if he hoped to play any tricks with that eye on him. Then, having caught mine for that moment, the eye was attentively fixed on our host again. You see how preposterous it was already. Estale apparently could notice a trifle like the dust on Rook's clothes, but he seemed to be both blind and deaf to everything else. The soft surging murmurs of the crowd outside, the voice of the inspector in the garden, the shadows of strangers across the French windows. He just dropped heavy stone jars to the floor, talked about wool gathering, and had not even thought of extinguishing the candle that was melting and guttering in his hand. Wool gathering, Philip Estale, the least woolly-minded of men. Already I was certain that he was deliberately acting, and acting far from well at that. It was little Alan, the elder of the two boys, who broke the spell that seemed to have benumbed us all. He ran forward, his blue and white check smock against his father's knees and his little face upturned. An aeroplane, Daddy! He cried eagerly. Some men fell out of an aeroplane close to Jimmy and me, didn't they, Auntie Joan? In a parachute, bigger in this room. The little arms were outstretched to their widest reach. Do come quick and look, Daddy. And he seized his father's hand. Again I caught Hubbard's eye. Estale was at it again, this time with a badly exaggerated gesture of astonishment. He might have made just such a gesture if Alan had told him that the grandmother in the bed was really a wolf good enough for children but not for anybody else. Hubbard at any rate thought that this had lasted long enough. Do you mean to say that you didn't feel the whole house shake half an hour ago? He demanded. Estale turned, but with a curious reluctance that I didn't understand. I did fancy I heard a noise of some sort, he admitted. What about it? Hubbard gave it to him plain and unvarnished, for all the world as if he had been in the Admiral's office with a sentry with a bayonet at the door. A plane crashed, and 2 men came down on your roof in a parachute. One's living, the other's killed. Those are the police in your garden now. That's all, except that you seem to live in a pretty solidly constructed house. This time Estale made no demonstration. He stood listening for a moment longer, as if he thought Hubbard might add something, then, without a word, he released himself from Alan's hand and strode, not to the garden where the voices were, but towards the studio door.